Story recapped here. Today I'm going to explain a comedy and drama film called Delivery Man. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. David walks into his family's meat shop where his brother, Alexei, scolds him for taking their truck home. Alexei also asks if David got the jerseys for the night, and he replies that he does. Later, David sees Alexei on the phone with his pregnant wife. Stressed, Alexei advises his brother not to procreate. David hangs up the phone and asks Alexei to help him grow pot to pay his debt. Sarcastically, Alexei declares that growing pot is what he needs since having his wife near her due date isn't intense enough. Curious, Alexei asks David how much he owes and is shocked that he owes $80,000, which he borrowed to invest in new technology. Alexei thinks it's a pyramid scheme, but David insists that it isn't. Their father butts in and asks David about the jerseys as well. David says he has them, but the two stare at him doubtfully. Throughout the day, David goes to different banks to apply for loans to no avail. Because of this, he's late to pick up the jerseys, but he begs the owner, so he lets him in. However, David ends up getting a parking violation. He gets another parking violation while he's buying gardening books later. Despite this, he assures his brother that he has the jerseys in the truck, but it gets towed that night. In the end, he's the only one wearing a jersey in their basketball team photo. Afterward, he visits his girlfriend, Emma. She wonders if he's hiding something in his apartment because she's not allowed to visit anymore, but David assures her that he's not. Suddenly, Emma says that she's pregnant. David is stunned and tries to be supportive, but Emma catches on. She decides to take care of the child alone because she doesn't need an unreliable partner like him. David goes to his friend and lawyer, Brett, and opens up about Emma's pregnancy. He explains that he was initially shocked and scared, but once those feelings went away, he started to think that the pregnancy might be a great thing. Given his stress with his own kids, Brett advises that Emma should end her pregnancy. David defends that he might want a kid, but Brett insists that David is a free man and wouldn't want kids since they suck up their energy. While having their conversation, his kids bug him, so Brett tells David that he doesn't have the skills to raise a child. Still, David thinks he needs order in his life. David later arrives home and finds an attorney named Mark Williams waiting for him. Thinking that he's there for the debt, David desperately pretends not to speak English. Having no time to play along, the attorney recounts how David sold his sperm 693 times between 1991 and 1996 under the pseudonym Starbuck at the Grabowski-Levitt Clinic. Due to complications, the clinic gave his sperm to all their clients, leading to David having 533 children, 142 of whom wished to know David's identity. Despite having a confidentiality agreement, the attorney explains that some of his children contest the legality of the documents, so they demand to know who Starbuck is. In his utter shock, David speaks in Spanish, insisting that he's not David Wozniak to force the attorney to leave. The next day, David meets up with Brett, who explains that David's children are contesting his right to privacy as a violation of their right to know their parentage, making the case quite challenging. Despite this, Brett is excited because such an odd case will allow him to leave his mark as a lawyer. He hands him an envelope containing the identity of the 142 children who hope to persuade David to meet them. Legally, Brett has to give it to him, but he insists that David shouldn't open it. Despite this, David returns home and opens the envelope. The next day, he goes to Brett and asks him to accompany him in visiting the one offspring that he read the profile of, a professional basketball player named Andrew Johansson. They watch Andrew's basketball game, and David cheers for him. When Andrew's team wins, David feels like a proud father. After the game, David brags that Andrew is an extension of himself. Brett shrugs it off and suggests pleading insanity so he can't be held responsible for his donations. However, David doesn't like the idea. Later that day, David plays basketball with his team more enthusiastically, having been inspired by his son. Afterward, he goes to Emma, who's a police officer. He declares that he officially decided to have a life and to convince Emma that he deserves to be their kid's father. One day, Alexei brags about how much he loves his child, advising David to have one, in contrast to what he said days before. This prompts David to announce that Emma is pregnant. At home, David pulls another profile of his child from the envelope. The following day, he arrives at a coffee shop and sees his other son, Josh, pissed about someone on the phone. David orders an espresso to go, but Josh makes his order rudely, so David reminds him that he's a barista and should be more polite to a customer. Josh lashes out, stressing that he's an actor who's missing the audition of a lifetime while working at that coffee shop. Awkwardly, David leaves but stays in the truck to consider things. Soon, he returns to the coffee shop and offers to watch over the place so Josh can go to his audition. To prove that he won't steal from the shop, David offers Josh to drive his truck that's full of supplies. The coffee shop soon becomes busy, and David messes up the orders. Eventually, the cafe owner arrives, so David explains that Josh got called in for an audition. The owner decides to fire Josh, adding that he's not a good actor, so he's wasting his time. David defends that it was his idea, so the owner blames him for Josh being unable to pay his rent. Heartbroken, David meets Josh when he returns, and Josh immediately realizes that he got fired from the coffee shop. However, he announces that he got the part and is officially an actor. Excited, David congratulates him. Back home, he opens another profile and soon sees his daughter, Kristen, talking over the phone. Outside her apartment, he spots a pizza delivery man having trouble, so he gets an idea. Soon, David knocks on Kristen's door to deliver her pizza. However, she's still arguing with someone on the phone about money, so David tells her the pizza is free because she won their contest. Stressed and confused, Kristen just tells him to leave, but David notes that she's not doing well and excuses that the restaurant has a policy not to leave their customers in such a condition. Kristen suddenly becomes quiet, so David checks on her and sees her hyperventilating after injecting herself. David rushes her to the hospital, but she immediately tries to escape when she regains consciousness. Orderlies stop her, and when the doctor asks who David is, Kristen accuses him of being ashamed to say he's her father, though he realizes that it's an act. Stunned, David confirms that he's Kristen's father, so the doctor tells him that Kristen is refusing rehabilitation. Since she's underage, he can decide for her instead. David tries convincing Kristen to get rehabilitated, but she insists on being released. She pleads for him since she doesn't want to be locked up in a facility and lose her job. Choosing to trust her, David signs her release forms. At her apartment, Kristen assures him that he made the right decision, promising she'll work at Bloomingdale's tomorrow. Thanking him, Kristen hugs David, and the gesture touches David's heart. In the morning, David waits for Kristen at Bloomingdale's, growing more concerned as the clock ticks. Finally, he sees Kristen running to work, and David exclaims in delight. Finding a new purpose in life, David throws out his garden and posts his children's profiles on his apartment wall. One by one, he visits and helps his children in small ways, like supporting them in their careers, keeping one out of trouble while drunk, and protecting one of his daughters from catcalling. After meeting some of them, he shares with Brett that he's decided to be a guardian angel to look out for his 533 children. Brett ridicules this, though he thinks it fits the insanity plea he's aiming for in his case. Later, David finds Emma inside his truck, announcing that she's getting her first ultrasound. Nervous, she asks David to be a friend to support her, and he agrees. They head to the clinic, and he's amused at seeing his baby. Afterward, they watch kids at a playground as Emma suddenly feels scared of having a kid. David calms her down and assures her that she'll be a good mother. Still not fully trusting him, Emma decides to declare him the father on probation, and David gladly accepts. One day, David checks another profile and visits Ryan, who's suffering from multiple sclerosis in an assisted living facility. Despite hesitations, he spends the entire day with Ryan and helps put him to bed. On another day, David follows his other son, Channing, and sees him in relationships with multiple men. Soon, he follows Channing at a hotel where he attends a gathering. David blends in with the crowd, only to discover that the gathering is for Starbucks kids. Surrounded by his children, David looks at their faces, even spotting Kristen there. When he stands up, Taylor, who's leading the gathering, asks if he has any comments. Nervously, David notes that they're so focused on finding Starbuck, but at least they're still brothers and sisters who have found one another. The audience applauds his comment. Before leaving, Kristen approaches him and asks what David is doing there. He lies, presenting himself as Ryan's adoptive father. His other sons that he's met before also recognize him, so he keeps repeating his lie. After leaving them, Brett sees him and warns him that what he's doing goes against his own case. Realizing that he's been tracking down his children, Brett tells him to stop, comparing his actions to his long list of mistakes. However, David stresses that he feels like he's doing the right thing for the first time in his life. As he walks away, Brett yells that he should stop seeing his kids, which is overheard by another of his biological sons, Vigo. Upon returning home, David gets beaten by people he owes money. After convincing them that he'll get their money, David calls up people to borrow money, but to no avail. Devastated, he hears rustling inside his apartment, so he checks and finds Vigo. Vigo already knows his identity, pointing out the wall of his children's profiles as evidence. David asks if he's gonna expose him, and Vigo admits that he isn't sure sure. Vigo asks what he does for a living, and David tells him that he works at a meat store. Vigo scoffs since he's a vegetarian, quoting philosophies that insist on how eating meat destroys their world and their soul. Despite this, Vigo asks to stay for a few days to get to know his dad. After 2 weeks, David complains to Brett about Vigo taking up his time with long philosophical conversations. However, Brett advises him to do whatever Vigo wants, so he doesn't get exposed. One night, as David heads for his basketball game, Vigo treats him coldly until he invites him to play. Vigo excitedly gets ready but plays terribly on the court. Afterward, Vigo invites him for another gathering of Starbucks children, but David declines since he has plans with Emma. David reminds Vigo that he also has a real family to go to, which offends the kid. Vigo insists that he and his other children are also his real family because they exist for real. That weekend, Vigo and David go on a hike, with David stressing that he stood up Emma to be with him. To David's surprise, they arrive at a campsite where all his kids are. David assumes Vigo will expose him, but Vigo clarifies that he intends to keep them all for himself. David bonds with his children, even giving them meat from the meat shop for barbecue. The half-siblings also bond together, not knowing that their father's already with them. Later that night, David brings Ryan to the camp to watch the sunrise with his siblings. After returning to the facility, he admits to Ryan that he is his father and promises to visit him again. The following day, Emma joins David's family for dinner. Their father recounts how he and his wife always wanted to go to Italy, but life got in the way. When his wife fell ill, David surprised him with an all-expense-paid trip to Italy with the entire family. He assures Emma that though David has flaws, he has his marvelous moments. After dinner, Emma wonders how David paid for their trip, so he reveals he got the money from his manual labor job. The following day, Brett tells David that the Starbucks kids camping is trending with extensive media coverage. Brett suggests they sue the clinic for substantial punitive damages, since overusing his sperm threatened his anonymity and made him a laughingstock. He assures him that the bad publicity is good for their countersuit and could earn David enough to pay off his debts. As David sees how the media ridicules Starbucks, however, he doesn't feel as confident. The next day, while shopping for baby supplies with Emma, David asks what she thinks about Starbucks. She says that it's horrible and not normal. After that, he meets his brothers at the shop, only to learn that the people he owes money to harmed their father. David rushes to his father, but he refuses to see him. Desperate, he meets with Brett and decides to file the countersuit. Soon, Brett goes to court and finds a supportive drawing from his kids on his files, making him smile. The clinic's lawyer insists that the kids have the right to know who their father is, but Brett stresses that the situation is already chaotic to Starbucks. Some of the kids also give their testimony, expressing why they want to know their father. Still, Brett points out how the public humiliates Starbucks, which wouldn't have happened if the clinic didn't overuse his sperm. The defense lawyer closes his case by saying that the children didn't agree to anything, yet they're the ones directly affected. However, in his closing statement, Brett points out that without the anonymity clause, none of the children would exist. The following day at the court, the judge decides that Starbucks would remain anonymous and would be entitled to $200,000 in punitive damages by the Grabowski-Levitt Clinic. The reporters soon interview Brett, who's happy to have vindicated his client's rights but feels compassion for all Starbucks children. High on his victory, he congratulates David on TV and takes it back, saying that he's his lover. David then watches the reporters interview his children, who are disappointed but are sure that Starbucks will reveal himself if he decides to. Taylor adds that to them, Starbucks is someone who gives life and happiness where it's needed. At the meat shop, Brett is frustrated that his mother and children tease him about the slip-up. Feeling conflicted, David wonders if he'll lose the money from the countersuit if he identifies himself, which Brett confirms. At night, David admits to his father that he's Starbucks and asks for advice. His father recounts how he lived in poverty and went to the States with only $10 from his father. Despite this, his great fortune and success are to see his sons every day. With that, he gives David his inheritance from the meat store to pay off his debts. David smiles but worries that his kids will be disappointed that he's just an incompetent meat truck driver. Still, his father assures him that people are going to love him. The next day, he posts his confession on the Starbucks kids' social media page. Then, he goes to Emma's place, only to see an ambulance arrive at her apartment. At the hospital, Emma gives birth to their son, and David marvels at his new baby. The next day, David finds his children, brothers, and father visiting the hospital. After a big family hug, David proudly declares that he is their biological father and that they now have a little brother. Afterward, David goes to Emma and proposes to her. Emma says yes, and while they hug, David admits he is Starbucks. In her shock, Emma thinks David is only proposing to lessen the blow of his confession. She declares that David is no longer her son's father, but he tells her no one but him can change that he's a father. He admits that this experience is entirely new, but despite the drawbacks, he insists that having 533 children offers joy in vast amounts of free babysitting. David points out that it's a risk to confess this to her, but he's doing it for the sake of his kids. This is his proof that no matter what their son gets into, he'll be there for him. In addition, he tells her that the proposal was real. This finally convinces Emma, so she kisses him. David's children meet their new brother, and David bonds with his sons and daughters one by one.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.